I am privileged to say hello to lots and lots of you, uh, honored, honored followers of Jesus. Uh, I am certainly glad to have Senator Thomas here from Ohio State Senator. Welcome, brother.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good to have you here. And I could name many other names, but I will name my daughter-in-law, Beth. Good to see you, Beth. There has to be special honor here. It's my privilege to introduce, and I'm Lynn Thrush. I serve as the bishop of the Great Lakes Conference of the Brethren in Christ Church, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, Kentucky, Tennessee. And I bless this work of peacemaking. Thank you for your openness to the Spirit and your responsiveness to the Spirit. It's my privilege to introduce our honored guest speaker, Pastor Tracie Hunter. She is a woman of valor, courage, and strength. From the Lord, she has received gifts of intellect and wisdom. She has a wide bandwidth of experience in the fields of law and communication. She's a woman of prayer and deep conviction in following the living and holy God. For the past 11 years, she has served as the senior pastor of the Western Hills Brethren in Christ Church in Cincinnati, Ohio. My predecessor, Bishop John Zook, cooperated with the Holy Spirit to find Pastor Tracie for the Brethren in Christ. And I honor him for his early and insightful support for Pastor Tracie. It's been my privilege to serve as Pastor Tracie's bishop, to work beside her for 2 years as assistant moderator of the Great Lakes Conference, and to speak words of support and demonstrate love and care whenever I can. Learning takes place when we listen. I follow Jesus better because I listen and I know Pastor Tracie. So friends, it is our distinct privilege to have her address us now. Pastor Tracie.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. I want to, of course, honor and recognize my bishop, Lynn Thrush, who has put confidence in me, which I'm very grateful. I want to thank you, Ben, as well as everyone from the BIC Peace and Justice Project for inviting me here this evening. So I'm honored to be a part of tonight's event. It's actually been a very long, arduous journey for me for the past 10 years, starting in 2010, when I first announced in Cincinnati, Ohio, that I was going to run for the judge of the Hamilton County Juvenile Court. There had never been in history before an African-American, neither male or female, in that position. And there had never also been a Democrat in that position as well, although I think that probably in what has ensued over the years probably had more to do, honestly, with my race than it did my political affiliation with the Democratic Party. But in 2010, I ran to become judge. And it just so happened that at the end of the election in November of 2010, that they had determined that I had lost the election. But, and because most of you here are all, you know, your pastors, your leaders, your spiritual people, you understand when I say that for me to run as for judge, it was, you know, not a decision that I took lightly, especially in the climate here in Hamilton County, which is Cincinnati, Ohio. Hamilton County is the third largest county in the state of Ohio. But I only ran for judge because after practicing law at that time for about 17 years here in the city of Cincinnati, my experience was that there was a lot of discrimination. There was a lot of injustices that were occurring within the court system. And as a defense lawyer, I had the opportunity to see them up close firsthand. And I was really disturbed by what I saw, particularly in the juvenile court here. We had one of the highest bind over rates in the state of Ohio that's trying young children as adults. Right now, we currently have a 100% bind over rate of all African-American children, trying them in the adult court system. Over 40% of the children, when they appeared in court, did not have legal representation. Most were represented by a public defender. And the things that I saw were egregious to me. And it was spiritually, because I was at the time, very a devout Christian, have been all of my adult life. And, when I was practicing law, I was practicing not just as as a lawyer, if you will, but I was honoring my faith. And so when I recognized injustices, I set out to try to rectify them. But it became so egregious to me spiritually that there was a point in my legal career where I decided that I had had enough because it was literally spiritually making me sick. Sometimes I would go to court to see and experience some of the things that I saw as a lawyer, trying to just represent the children in a just and fair manner. And so I remembered that time, and this was early in my legal career. I've now been a lawyer almost 30 years. And I said, Lord, I got to step away from this. And if I ever come back to this system, I could only come back as the judge so that I can make some changes here. And I left. Well, I was running a Christian radio station at the time. When I came to the Brethren in Christ as pastor, when Bishop Zick brought me aboard, I was running a Christian radio station, also practicing law. And I was focused on that. But at some point, God really began to really pull on my strings and remind me that he wanted me to be a judge. And I rejected that thought for years. And then finally in 2009, at the end of 2009, it really penetrated my heart so deeply that I ran for judge. And it seemed to be impossible. No one thought that I could win because, again, they've never had a Black person in that position before. And here in Hamilton County, that's a very, very, very powerful position. It's like the judgeship of the juvenile court controls like the second largest budget in Hamilton County, only to the sheriff's department. So you can imagine never having a Black person in that type of a powerful position. So I ran, and on election night, they said I lost. But because of my relationship with God, who had nudged me to run, God literally told me that I had won that election. And so, of course, when I announced that, that didn't go over too well. But I filed a lawsuit after they declared my opponent, white male Republican, the winner. I just knew in my spirit that I won that election. So in November 2010, I sued the Hamilton County Board of Election, and that lawsuit lasted 18 months. And during the time of the lawsuit, they appointed my opponent to the court, to the juvenile court. It's a two-judgeship court. And so while I was fighting the lawsuit, trying to prove that I won, they actually made him the judge and put him in the court, even though we proved in 2012 that he actually lost the election to me. So they tried very hard to keep me from getting that position on the bench. So when finally in 2012, I proved I won, the federal court overturned the election, and I was finally sworn in and seated as judge. Well, the prosecutor of Hamilton County represented the Board of Elections against me, and he was not very happy that I had pursued that lawsuit. In fact, they were very upset because they were arguing state rights, and I had filed it in federal court, and they were mad. But I think they were more mad by the fact that I was a Black woman, literally coming into a court system that had a lot of power, including budgetary as well as personnel. So I began to make changes in the juvenile court. I hired Black magistrates for the first time. I made some changes with the shackling. They were shackling juveniles. I unshackled the juveniles, and they were really upset by that, which, by the way, 3 years after they kind of violently took me off the bench, shackling is now a statewide mandate in Ohio. They can no longer shackle the juveniles. I refused to allow them to take photographs and put them in the paper of children in my courtroom. So I was sued repeatedly by the newspapers. Finally, and Joe Dieters, the prosecutor, who was representing me and suing me at the same time, because he was the statutory prosecutor of Hamilton County, he began to, he was supposedly representing me, even though I told him it was a conflict of interest because the election lawsuit was actually still going on, but he refused to step down. So he began to represent me, but on the other side of me, he was suing me at the same time. So I finally filed an ethics complaint against Joe Dieters in 2000, at the end of about 2013. Right after I filed an ethics complaint against Joe Dieters for misrepresentation of cases in the juvenile court, mishandling of cases, as well as what they were doing to me every single day. It was a battle for me just to go to work to do my job. So when I filed an ethics complaint against Joe Dieters, he got mad, and within 2 weeks or less after I filed a complaint, he accused me of crimes in office. And mind you, at this time, I'd only been on the bench, sworn in for 18 months. So after I filed an ethics complaint against him with the Ohio Supreme Court, he accused me of crimes. He then got personal business associates. They were his personal lawyers. One was his divorce lawyer and also his criminal lawyer. And he got them to indict me and file charges against me. And so in January 2014, I was charged with 9 felony counts of all kinds of just crazy things as the first Black juvenile court judge. And they were threatening me with like 13 to 20 years in prison. It was crazy. It was a media circus here. And I think they were trying to get me to step down as judge. But because I was so, number one, assured of my innocence, I was willing to fight them and not allow them to make me plead to something less or anything, even though their goal was solely to get me off of the bench. We went to trial. It was a 6-week trial. It was a total media circus. At the end of the trial, they took a sealed verdict, and it was like a holiday weekend. We came back after the holiday. The judge opened the sealed verdict and said, "You were found guilty on one of the counts." I immediately, at that time, my lawyer, as is the law, asked the judge to poll the jury, and he refused to poll the jury. And poll the jury is to say, is guilty or verdict, is guilty or verdict. That's law. He refused to do it. Not only did he not poll the jury, he then dismissed the jury. So he dismisses the jury. Right after that, I go home and I get a call from my lawyer that 3 of the jurors had contacted my lawyer to tell him that guilty was not their verdict. And you have to have a unanimous verdict in a criminal trial. We then filed a motion with the judge. They contacted the judge. The judge refused to overturn that one wrongful conviction. And I've been fighting it ever since. So I started appealing it. It was appealed to the prosecutor, his mother-in-law, who sits on the Court of Appeals, his good buddies, they're all Republicans and all white, sits on the Court of Appeals. And so I began to fight through the system. The judge sat on the bench and actually sentenced me to 6 months in jail, despite the fact that the Ohio Supreme Court law says that a judge in the same county cannot preside over any court or case matters that have to do with a judge in the same county. They ignored all of the laws, ignored all the ethics, because all of them were friends and all family. And I've been fighting for over 5 years to clear my name. The jurors all filed sworn affidavits saying the guilty was not their verdict. The court has continued to ignore it for the last 5 years. And then finally, in July of 2020, I was violently dragged out of court and thrown into jail. And I spent almost 3 months in jail before I was released. And I'm now out, but I'm suffering a lot of physical conditions and illnesses as a result of the time that I spent in jail, based on the things that happened and the freezing temperatures that were in there. But more importantly, here I am since January 2014. I've been fighting for my freedom, and I've been fighting for my name to be cleared. And I cannot stop, because number one, I don't believe that I finished the call of God upon my life to be a judge. And I thank God for Bishop Lynn, who constantly reiterates to me and reminds me of that calling, because sometimes when you're facing the type of injustice that I've been facing for the length of time that I've been facing it, it gets dark. And Bishop Lynn came to see me in jail multiple times. He always came to encourage me and to remind me that what was happening to me was akin to what happened to people in the Bible. And so with that, and with my faith in God and knowing that God is for me, and knowing that I was in there making changes, interrupting the school to prison pipeline. And that's really what it was all about. You may or may not know that the prison system makes a lot of money, and they were making a lot of money off of the juveniles. And when I came in with the ideology of rehabilitation over incarceration to reform the children and give them a chance at life, it began to take away money out of the system because they were making money by putting what I call heads in the beds. And literally, I remember being on the bench, and there were times that the probation department would recommend that I lock some kids, lock the children up for a long period of time. And the charge did not warrant me locking them up. And I would ask them why. And one day, one of the probation officers admitted to me it was because they were low in this particular private facility, and they had guaranteed them a certain amount of children to be in those beds. And when the contract was low, they expected me as a judge to go along with it. And I absolutely refused to do anything other than what was right, fair, and just for all children, Black, white, Hispanic, whatever. And so therein is a nutshell that I could possibly make this 10-year saga that continues to go on. I'm still fighting for my freedom, even though I've gone to jail and served the time, if you will. They took my law license from me, and the conviction is still standing, and I'm still fighting that wrongful conviction every day in federal court. I have new lawyers that were hired while I was in jail, because what we found is that a lot of the lawyers here in Cincinnati were connected, and most of them were afraid of the prosecutor. We have the prosecutor here that really puts fear in a lot of people, and they're afraid to go against him. And so because of that, I've been standing up for justice and fighting for my freedom, fighting for my rights, but more importantly, fighting for my name to be cleared. And many people think, well, just go on. And I can't go on, because I believe that it's also an indictment against the kingdom of God, because I represent God. And it's important to me that my name be cleared. And it's important to me that I get my law license back. It's important to me that I finish the work of a judge that God called me to do. Thank you.
Wow, Tracie, thank you so much for sharing. That is just so many interlocking systems of injustice. It's just, I feel you when you say, like, yeah, this is discouraging 10 years of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and you have good work to do in that judgeship. You actually can imagine, like, when we are victorious, you'll go back and take that seat and be the judge. Is that your, like, ideal scenario?
My ideal scenario is that I would be reinstated to my judgeship, and that I would finish the work that God called me to do there. I did change laws. Even in that year that I was on the bench, not only did the unshackling policy be instituted, I put in place the first order to unshackle juveniles. The Ohio Supreme Court, 3 years after they suspended me, because I'm still a suspended judge, 3 years after I was suspended, the Ohio Supreme Court made that the order across the state of Ohio. The other thing that happened while I was on the bench that the prosecutors were really upset about is that cases came to me where the defense lawyers wanted the prosecutors to turn over certain evidence to the defense that might show that the child was innocent, and the prosecutors were withholding that evidence. So when I began to rule that they had to turn it over, they were very, very mad at me. And so my order actually was overturned here in Hamilton County by, like I said, the prosecutor's mother-in-law, who's on the First District Court of Appeals, which was the appeals court that heard cases that came out of my courtroom. They overturned me, but when my case made it to the Ohio Supreme Court, the Ohio Supreme Court upheld my ruling. And so after just that year on the bench, my ruling became state law. And so now in the state of Ohio, all courts across the state of Ohio must uphold that law, that if the defense is asking for certain reports that the prosecution has in its possession, they must turn it over. So not only did I change state law in that, my election case also changed state law, no federal law, so that now when they refuse to count those votes at election time, because of my my case, Hunter v. Hamilton County Board of Elections, now they must also count those votes. So, you know, it's
you're God. The anointing seems clear. That there's so much that you can do and that you did do in such a short amount of time before the white establishment came down upon you and really threw you out with such force. It's incredible that they have that much power. It's incredible that that the system could function on such an evil level just because of relationships and impressions and yeah, it does seem like a stronghold that we ought to storm. So what are your questions? You might have, I have a couple questions that I wrote down while Tracie was talking, but we have some time to kind of just let that happen to us a little bit before we get into our small groups and talk about some of our own stories. Do you have questions for Tracie? The story is so complex that she spent most of her time talking about the details of all of the injustices, but you might ask her a personal question. Is that okay, Pastor Tracie?
Absolutely.
Or you know, other things as well. It's open time. You can just unmute yourself and speak up. And if you both start speaking at the same time, I'll save you and tell you who to go first.
Well,
Pastor Tracie, this is Donna.
Oh, yeah. Donna, Cecil was.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
The state representative or senator was speaking. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that. I just wanted to say that the community stood behind her. Tracie got a significant amount of support from the community throughout this entire endeavor. We submitted thousands of signatures to the Supreme Court, Justice Maureen O'Connor, all about this entire case. So we recognize the injustice that occurred to her. And this is why we're still here as a community, still supporting her throughout this entire ordeal. I think most important is to recognize the fact that Hamilton County, the criminal justice system in Hamilton County is the most powerful system for the Republican Party in Hamilton County. That system controls a significant amount of money, people. It's very, very intimidating. And when Judge Hunter entered into that system, she upset the norm. She was not supposed to win that election. And this is why they came after her with such force. But overall, we're still with her. There's been legislation, I should say complaints filed with the Supreme Court. There's been complaints filed with the Attorney General's office of the state of Ohio. But again, though, you have to understand, Ohio is for the most part, is a Republican state. And so when you have someone like a Joe Dieters, who has the kind of influence that Hamilton County brings to the Republican Party, it's very difficult. In fact, whenever a Republican is running for president, they come to Hamilton County because Hamilton County provides more money than any other county in the country. They raise more money for the president, and so
wow.
they come to Hamilton County, Indian Hill, areas like that in Hamilton County. So I just want to
thank you so much, Senator Thomas. It's just so, it's a foreign territory for me to figure out all the ins and outs of how these political systems work. But once you get into them, as you two are very much so, you see just how much room there is for evil and injustice to just breed and spread. It's incredible.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for being here, Senator Thomas.
Yes.
Donna, what were you going to say?
Oh, nothing too significant. I just, as you spoke, Pastor Tracie, I could feel the evil in me just pouring out of what happened to you, and made me physically sick to my stomach. And I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you're enduring all that for so many years. I wish I wish I could take it from you, and I'll do whatever I can.
Thank you. Thank you.
There are some ways that we're going to talk about before we go to support Tracie. Afterwards, we want to get together on that. Any questions for Tracie? I have one, and maybe that'll set you off on another. Can you say, I mean, I just didn't understand, 100% bind over. Does that mean every juvenile is getting tried as an adult?
No, what that mean, what I meant to say, I tried to clarify it, is that all of the juveniles that are being tried as an adult in Hamilton County or Cincinnati, Ohio, are African American. So they come in on a variety of offenses, and there's certain criteria that has to be met in order for a juvenile to be bound over, but they don't typically record, the prosecutors don't typically request that white children be bound over, even though there have been some very, very egregious cases that I specifically recall where they didn't recommend binding over the children, but keeping them in juvenile court. But they routinely definitely request that Black children be bound over. And even though we're the third largest county, before I was suspended from the bench, we bound over 3 times the rate of Cleveland, Ohio, and Franklin County. Franklin is Columbus, Ohio, which is the largest county. Cleveland is Cuyahoga, the second largest. We bound over 3 times more in Hamilton County than the largest county in the state of Ohio. That's how, what such a police state, you know, we are here.
Yeah, wow. And that is definitely something that has come up. I've seen it often in the news of late, because we're trying to affect these public safety systems and actually have them change and be transformed. Hashtag defund the police is the moniker. Mm-hmm. But I have seen that it's a trope, and unfortunately I just hadn't registered for me as a white guy, you know, just confession there. But yeah, we represent the Black kids get represented in the media as adults. Mm-hmm. Stop having my children, you know, be treated as if they were men. They're 16 years old. You know, they're dumb kids, and even if they did terrible things, they shouldn't be in the paper. That's craziness.
Absolutely.
I have a question.
Yes.
Thanks, Dan.
Really appreciate your recounting of what is incredible story. What I didn't hear, Tracie, is do you have any family, and what, if any, repercussions came to your family or your circle of close friends as a result of the trials and tribulations that you've had to face?
It's been a very, thank you for that question. It's been very impactful and hurtful to my family. And I think that's one of the things that egregious me the most is that even though it wasn't my fault per se, just the fact that I ran for judge and kind of, as Senator said, upset that apple cart that brought the type of not only attention but harm to my personal family that it has, makes me very sad. My father, actually, the media is we have one daily newspaper here. It's a Republican paper. It's the Cincinnati Enquirer, and they worked with the prosecutor to put out a lot of just false stories. I mean, from the time that I ran, you know, initially, as Senator said, they didn't take me seriously, but when they began to see that it looked possible that I could win that election, then they just brought the fire, and they started, I mean, they lied about my career. I think that was one of the first stories that came out. And, you know, even when I sent them the information and asked for a retraction, they just refused to do it. So the prosecutors and the Republican Party literally worked with the media here to try to bring me down. And so they were publishing just tons of just false stories. And after one of the very worst first stories that they published, I think many years ago, my dad actually had a heart attack. And it was right, you know, it was like he read the paper and within days he had a heart attack, and he never left the hospital, and then he died. And he died just before, and they were doing all of this stuff to me at the time, you know, just every day, just, you know, it wasn't a joke, but the saying in my courtroom was, what are they going to do to Judge Hunter today? Because every day I went in, it was something different. But that was one of the worst things, was my dad suffered And so all the time that this was going on, my family was being under attack. You know, my dad's dying and we're trying to take care of him. So he passed in 2013, a month before they indicted me. And then the toll that it's taken on my mom has been tremendous, to be honest. You know, my mom's just really not the same person my mom's always been a vibrant, you know, outspoken, just, you know, person. And I was just saying to someone today how I miss hearing my mom laugh, and the incredible pain that my mom has endured watching me go through this in the media, and having my family, my brother, who also worked for the juvenile court. In fact, they brought us together in this supposed case. My brother worked for the court before I got there, 7 years, I think, 5 to 7 years before. I had nothing to do with it. I wasn't even a judge at the time, and I wasn't working at the court. And literally the charge that they brought against me, the one that I'm trying to overturn, is one called securing a public contract. And they actually accused me of getting the job for my brother. And then when, of course, we were able to prove legally through court documents that he already worked for the court, then the media started changing it. And so they've been, from the time it all started, they've been coming after, you know, myself and my brother, which the weird thing about it is Hamilton County is a nepotistic system. And so all of the prosecutor has like over 30 family members that work for the court. The judge's children were practicing in my courtroom in front of me as a judge. So while they were literally accused me ultimately of what their nepotism, I don't have any family members that I hired to work for the court, but that's literally what they accused me of. And then when we proved that that's not what happened, then they changed it, you know, to something else. And so it's hurt my brother, it's hurt my mother, my dad's dead now. And of course, my associates and, you know, even our congregation, you know, we've stood tall as a congregation. And I'm so grateful to the Brethren in Christ, to Bishop Zook before Bishop Thrush, and then Bishop Thrush. They stood with me, and this congregation has stood with me because they believe in me. And, you know, and oftentimes they would come down to the court, to the trial. And so it's been an impact all the way around on all of us.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you so much. We have time for one more question if you have one.
I have a question. Hey, Pastor Tracie. This is Pastor Jonah from Pleasant Hill, Ohio. Yeah, just recently met you over for the first time on one of the conference calls. Yeah, thanks very much for sharing your story. My first response is just to, I suppose, just to lament this, and just grateful for your courage, and grateful that God will vindicate you ultimately. One day, pray that happens sooner rather than later. But I'm just kind of even reflecting about how maybe us as white Christians are hearing this story, hearing this systemic racism done against you. I'm trying to think about the connection between the daily ways that white Christians, white pastors contribute to systemic racism. So for me, I'm in a white rural context, so where there's been self-segregation over generations, so it's like 99% white in my community. And even in a recent conversation with, to be frank, with other white pastors in the Great Lakes Conference, I was sensing that just reflecting on George Floyd and just the other racial unrest, that this seemed like an issue that was, oh, this is a distant issue. What can we do? This is almost like this is kind of not our issue. We feel bad. How can we help? But there's not really a sense of like communal responsibility, just that even in our white communities, and of how we contribute to this with our white supremacy. So basically, just as I'm trying to wrestle with this and come to more clarity with this, my question is, how can we white brothers and sisters in white communities, in some sense, take communal responsibility for this injustice against you that you endured? How can, or maybe another way to phrase that question, how can you help us to even see this as our responsibility?
Well, I think the first thing, and that's a very powerful question that you've asked, and you know, I'm not sure, because I can't see through your lenses, just like it's difficult probably for you to see through mine. Mm-hmm. But what I do know that has been helpful to me and has affirmed me throughout this process has been the fact that I do have white leadership that has been standing by me. And that has been an incredible experience. One, because all of the people that did this to me are white. Every single one of them is a white Republican male. And I felt like, I really don't want to use such language. It felt like a brutal rape. And historically for African Americans, if you don't have to, go back, just 100+ years to know what that means to an African American woman, but to have all of these white men gang up on me, literally, to take what I rightfully earned, what I worked hard for, and to have them overnight turn my life inside out, upside down, and to do it to show me, well, this is how I felt. They were trying to show me, Black women, you don't know your place. And because you don't know your place, we're going to show you your place. And that's what literally they did. And that's what they're still doing. And so to have persons like Lynn Thrush, my bishop, and to have a John Zook, my bishop, standing by my side, and not just them, I had white Republican friends that also were responsible for me becoming judge. I won in a county that was only 20-something% Black. That meant it wasn't Black people that ultimately got me into my judgeship. It was white people that believed in me, which is one reason why I think the paper came at me so harshly and so strongly, because they were trying to eradicate the confidence that the white people, especially that read the paper, that the confidence that they had in me by that position. And so standing with me as a Black woman and denouncing racism, denouncing what they did to me is wrong, recognizing that it felt like a rape and a lynch to me, because that's literally, and that's how we've described it here in Hamilton County, is that, lynching, and that wasn't so long ago in the past in the natural. In fact, if you're paying attention, you've seen that 6 Black people have been lynched down south just in the last few weeks. And they're saying it was suicide. Well, Black Americans are saying, we didn't, we doubt that these Black people went out and hung themselves from these trees. And so having persons like yourself opening your mind to the possibility that the pain and the hurt and the trauma that we have been feeling as Black people is real. And me here in Ohio, I'm probably the most high profile case of someone that was literally systematically lynched through the system, in the paper, in the TV, constantly. And then to have, when I was sentenced in 2014 initially, it was white pastors. In addition to Black pastors, there were a lot of white pastors that got up and said, we know this lady, we've done prayer walks. I led over almost 200 prayer walks in the city of Cincinnati that I organized and led. And many white people joined me on those marches. In 2001, when we had a riot here in Cincinnati because the police killed an unarmed Black man, it was the prayer walk that I organized on the day of the man's funeral that kept there from being a literal bloodbath. This is how one of the TV stations described it. And it was white people walking with me from the right Christian station that I had asked for my Black Christian station if they would join us that day. And so it makes a powerful statement. It made a powerful statement to see a Lynn Thrush walk through that jail, and another man here, Ford, Taylor, he's a very, well-known businessman, lives here, Cincinnati in Texas, but he came in there with his Texan self and let them know that he was my friend. And so when he stood with me and continues to stand with me, and even lost business, he had one of his business contracts, he said one of his most lucrative, came to him. And when he was supporting me, told him that they were going to take their business away from him for supporting me. And he said, well, you walk and take your business away from, because she's my friend, and I'm standing with her because I believe in her. And he said, and if something happened to you and you were my friend, I'd stand with you too. And that business partner did not leave. And so having white people put themselves on the line too, out front publicly, and say, we stand with you, we support you. Right now in Cincinnati, the Black Lives Matter movement is being predominantly led by white people. And so when I go up to City Hall like I did last week, and it's white people standing out there, young white kids saying Black Lives Matter, I'm not used to that, but it feels good. Because now we see that other people that don't look like us are taking up the mantra and saying Black Lives Matter, because truthfully, until we're not saying, for those of you who've heard the phrase, all lives matter, Black people know all lives matter. We're just saying we need to know our lives matter too. I need to know this Black life matters here, because right now in Cincinnati, Ohio, I've been made to feel very low and like my Black life didn't matter. And so when Black people or when white people stand up and say, I see you, and I'm going to fight with you, and I'll walk hand in hand with you, like they did with Dr. Martin Luther King, that makes me feel confident that change is on the way.
And we want to be a part of that change. Thank you so much again, Tracie, for sharing with us, for putting your heart out there too. I know that you tell this story often, and it's painful. But certainly that one of the reasons to gather here to listen to you is to know that you matter, and you're our sister, and we are celebrating that togetherness and knowing that together we'll stand, and that we're going for our lens to be shifted. We don't all know everything, especially the white people, and we want to keep working on that. So Jonah, thank you for asking that question. I think there might be room for you to talk about that some more in breakout groups that we're going to do now.